Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. We're here with part 2 of the June Q&A series. If you missed part 1, go back and check out that. It's got the other half of the YouTube community tab questions. And over here we have Monitor Steve returning. He's found himself
just the power supply.
Yep, just the power supply. Good old Corsair. So yeah, should be a whole bunch of interesting stuff to get through. And yeah, what do you think? Gonna get through some good questions?
Oh, I always love answering the questions, and that isn't sarcasm. I do. It's good fun. I'm not like Tim.
Oh, come on.
But yeah, we have some good ones lined up, so I think we should probably get into it.
All right, let's do it.
All right, next one. What impact has human malware had on getting computer parts in Australia? I am in South Africa, and man, getting decently priced motherboards with Hardware Unboxed recommended VRMs these days is like fishing in a puddle. Yeah, I'd say pretty similar globally, really. Speaking with the retailers here, a few things have happened, actually. So, obviously, manufacturing's been impacted, the supply chain impacted, distribution has been impacted. But then, on the other end of that, demand has gone through the roof like I don't think anyone could have quite imagined. So, basically, everything, computer cases, power supplies, motherboards, the whole lot, is out of stock. And then you got your more mainstream things like webcams. Who would have thought, webcams would be, what the situation is there. You would have done very well if you had have invested in webcams prior to the pandemic, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, similar sort of story, motherboard pricing. And there's also other factors like currencies as well. Like the Australian dollar crashed early on in this, and it's sort of stabilized a bit over the last month, but that's inflated the cost of parts for us locally. So yeah, it's expensive buying motherboards here as well. So you're not alone in South Africa. It's pretty bad here in Australia too.
Yep.
Next question here. Oh, I love all these sort of questions. Who is taller, Tim or Monitor Steve? Well, I can't see it right now, but I've been put on a pedestal, so it's given me a bit of a height advantage, I think.
Maybe not anymore.
What is Tim doing? I can't see.
You just have to watch the video to find out.
Okay, interesting sort of question here. Should AMD punish OEMs like ASUS who botch their AMD parts like GPUs, notebooks, or refuse to support Zen 3 on B450 boards, etc.?
No,
well,
I don't think they should.
That's a tough one to answer because, first of all, we're not going to say that that's necessarily what they're doing. We don't really have any concrete evidence of that, so we're certainly not claiming that's what ASUS is doing. It's also a tough one to answer because we want AMD to give their partners the freedom to create varied products, interesting products,
Yep.
a bit more creativity. We don't want them to lock things down and sort of, give them a really tight set of parameters that they have to work to. That could result in less crap products, but we may not get some of the more interesting products we see as well. So the freedom there is important. And I guess it just means that reviewers like us have to get as many of the lower end or more affordable products and look into them to see if they are good or crap. So yeah, I guess no is the short answer to that one.
Yeah, I just feel, punishing, it's such a harsh word to use for what AMD would be doing. I mean, if they went and punished ASUS, I think you're not going to see better products necessarily. You'll just see ASUS stop making products. And so, if they say, oh, ASUS, we're going to punish you and not give you any more, Navi GPUs or whatever the situation is there, they're not going to suddenly start making good Navi GPUs. They're going to start just not making them at all. And that's just going to shrink the market. I just don't think that sort of thing is, worth bothering with. I think if anything, AMD just needs to improve their support for some of these companies. I think you touched on this a little bit, but just giving them the resources that they need to ensure that, if there's a situation where they don't have the right tools to design AMD products better, then AMD can come in and give them a bit of help. And I think we've seen some of that happen with products like their Zephyrus G14 laptop, which is actually a pretty good laptop. So I think AMD was apparently quite involved with the design of that. So doing more things like that is going to help out the ecosystem overall, rather than just punishing them and telling them, oh, we're not going to give you supply of things anymore. I just don't think that's a successful way to go about it.
I agree. You brought up some interesting points there, and I having thought about it, I really do think that this is probably more on AMD than their partners. While ASUS has done some questionable things recently, it's hard to go all in on them because we know what AMD's like, and I've heard from other partners that some important specs were changed late or weren't made clear and a bit unprofessional. So AMD really needs to get on top of what they're doing and with their more clearer communication to their partners. So doing some of the things Tim spoke about, I think that would just result in better products as well. So I think a lot of this is on AMD to sort of get their act together as well and make sure that specs are finalized well ahead of time and they aren't sort of making things up as they go and then catching their partners out because they've designed maybe a VRM for a certain power spec and then last minute AMD's gone, well, actually, this is what it is now. And then the partner ends up looking like they've released a bad product because they've targeted a certain price range and a certain spec that's now been increased on both fronts. Now that we're halfway through the year, what's your favorite tech? We often get asked these questions, don't we? They're very much on the spot questions. What's our favorite tech?
There's two things for me while you think about it, considering it seems like you're struggling a little bit. I think there's two things that come to mind from sort of things that I've been testing. I genuinely do think that DLSS 2.0 is a good technology, so I was quite pleased with how NVIDIA has redesigned that and redone it to actually make it quite good. Obviously, the first iteration wasn't particularly impressive, but I think that was mostly released in 2020, so I think it counts for this year. So from that sort of GPU technologies perspective and sort of what companies are doing there, that's one of my favorite things. And then as well, AMD's Renoir APUs, the Ryzen 4000 range for laptops has been very impressive, certainly exceeded my expectations for performance and things like that. They've solved a lot of the software bugs and issues with it. So I think it's actually a really compelling buy these days, which is perhaps better than I was expecting out of those APUs. So I think that would be another favorite of mine.
Okay, well, I think I'll just copy what you've said and sort of adjust that for my side of things. So I guess the products that I've been most interested in testing and most impressed with at the end of the day were, well, example like Tim's DLSS thing. You were really critical of DLSS. They sort of went back and redesigned it and made it better, and then you liked it. And I had a similar experience with MSI's X570 Tomahawk and then the ASUS Tough Gaming 5700 XT Evo, for example. Both of those products were completely overhauled. They're, well, new products essentially to fill the gap. So I was impressed with both of those. And then you had a Ryzen APU. So I guess like the Ryzen 1600 AF, was that late 2019?
Might have been late last year, but we can count it anyway. Why not?
Well, it didn't pop up on our radar and we didn't get to testing it until early 2020. So for $85, that was an awesome part. And then one part that was released this year, but technically its series was released last year, was the Threadripper 3990X. I mean, yeah, 64 cores, 128 threads. Pretty insane, pretty awesome. Not for everyone, of course, but maybe a glimpse into the future. But that was a really cool, pretty insane product. All right, next question here. Are B550 motherboards, as they are now, really worth it, considering that they will only be viable for maybe one more cycle of processors before AMD switches to AM5? What will happen to them? Okay. Will there be a hybrid situation where motherboards have the AM5 socket and run with the B550 chipset? Or will there be a situation with both AM4 and AM5 B550 boards? Would it be worthwhile to keep your existing B450 board, if you already own one, and wait for the AM5 boards? Or simply buy the B550 boards as they currently stand, knowing they may have a limited life cycle and not have more than one CPU upgrade path available? A lot of strange questions, I know. Where do I start with this one? Okay, well, I suppose the CPU cycle thing, so that was inevitable. It was always going to happen where AMD got to the end of the road with the socket. So that's really not an issue or a consideration. It just means that we're not going to recommend... It's not going to be an added feature. So, for example, when reviewing first and second gen Ryzen, it was like, these CPUs, on their own merit, they compete really well. They're exceptionally good value. And as an added benefit, with the motherboard that you have to invest in to support these CPUs, down the track you will have an upgrade option. So if you bought like the Ryzen 5 1600 or a lowish end first or second gen part, then when Zen 2 comes out, the Ryzen 3000 series or the 4000 series, depending on compatibility, you could upgrade to an 8-core part or a 12-core part or a 16-core part and keep your motherboard, which has been the case for a lot of people, so that's great to see. So with B550 motherboards, it's not really a thing. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you're wanting to buy a Ryzen 4000 CPU, or even in this right now, a 3000 CPU, it's like, you got to buy a motherboard. So B550 seems like the best way to go. There's a good range of varying quality boards. Anything to add to that part, Tim?
Yeah, I thought the question on will there be like B550 with the AM5 socket, I highly doubt that will be the case. I don't think so.
There's no way AMD wants to.
Yeah, just won't
they've
happen.
already made that. Yeah, they've already made this difficult enough. Tim's absolutely right on that one. There's going to be no hybrid, and there's just absolutely no need to do it. Really, if that was ever going to be a situation they were faced with having to do, they'd just rename it to B650 anyway.
Yep.
So it'd be the same chips. I mean, Intel and AMD do that all the time. But yeah, that's basically it. Would it be worthwhile to keep your existing B450 board if you already own one? Absolutely. Like, that's what we sort of fought for on the channel, was if you've got a good quality B450 board and you want to be able to put a Ryzen 4000 CPU on there and there's no real technical reason apart from like BIOS size limitations that can be worked around, whole different story that we've dedicated videos to. But yeah, absolutely. If you've got a good quality B450 board, do not upgrade because you don't need to.
All right, next question is, I'm a big EVGA fan. I just want to know your thoughts, if any, about the EVGA motherboards specifically. They are barely used in builds, but I'm just wondering what you think of them and any more thoughts on their existence.
Their existence, yeah, it's a good one. They look interesting. They look good. I know a lot of sort of extreme overclockers, your Buildzoid types, speak quite highly of a lot of their boards, but we have little to no experience. I've in my 20 odd years of doing this sort of work, I think I've touched maybe 2 EVGA boards. The most recent one I think was maybe like a Z97 board, maybe. They're not commonly sold here in Australia.
Yeah, not a big brand. GPUs, all that sort of thing is not that common here.
I saw this question, and because I've tested so many Z490 motherboards, I put a photo of most of them on Twitter a few days ago. So if you missed that, you can check that out. But anyway, I've checked a lot of Z490 motherboards, and I thought, I wonder if there are EVGA Z490 motherboards in Australia. I mean, I don't even know what boards they make. They're not on our radar at all, but there's none. There's 0 in Australia, so I don't know what they offer in the US. I didn't look into that. But basically, EVGA boards, they aren't really sold down under. You can get them. There are a few retailers that stock them, but at this point in time, I cannot buy a Z490 model. So
yep.
I have no idea what they offer there. But that's basically why we don't use them. And when it comes to builds and stuff, I mean, you've got 4 major brands, or at least 3 big brands in MSI, Gigabyte, and Asus, and they make, like, how many Z490 motherboards are there? Like,
especially for all price points, basically.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many boards. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, the more options, the merrier, as they say, but yeah, we're not desperate for someone to sort of step in and make good motherboards, because generally those 3 do a good job. And there's also ASRock in the mix as well, which have a lot of boards down under.
Next question is, what is with the general tech hate on all-in-one water cooling? They're better than air cooling, cheaper than a custom loop by a huge margin, and frankly, if the people that use them are happy with them, what does it matter? I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, but I would have thought it's around reliability and long-term use of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially it. As for if people that use them are happy with them, what does it matter? Well, it doesn't. But I'm not sure that sort of covers everybody who's had experiences with all-in-one liquid coolers. But yeah, generally the hate towards them is the fact that a lot of them aren't actually better than high-end air coolers, like your Noctua D15 or whatever. They're generally a bit cheaper, those air coolers, while being significantly more reliable, and there's no potential that they're going to leak fluid in your computer and kill it. That's obviously a big one. But yeah, it's the reliability. So you guys a lot of you no doubt watch Gamers Nexus. You've heard of Long Hair Steve. Well, they covered this particular. Am I able to get that in the shot?
Yeah, that's in. It's all good.
The Enimax Lictech, and this is an awesome performing all-in-one liquid cooler. The problem is they pretty much all die, or they did. So that was one of the original models, and mine gunked up and died like pretty much everyone else's. So that sucked. It wasn't particularly cheap, and yeah, basically one day my computer started crashing, and I'm trying to work out why, and then I realized it was running at like 100 degrees. And that's because the fluid was no longer circulating the loop. So whereas if I had an air cooler, and say the fan failed, well, you clip on a new fan and away you go, but this whole thing's junk now. So if that fails out of warranty, you have to throw it away and get a new one. But yeah, if an air cooler fails, it's like $20 for a new high-quality fan. So that's basically, it's a reliability thing, and just, yeah, reliability and the risk of leaking inside your computer, I suppose. And the performance, as I said, it's not that much better in reality. All right, next question here. Are 6 cores future-proof? If you were to build a gaming OC now, so just I think it means a gaming computer maybe, would you build it with 6 or an 8-core CPU? Budget €1,200, so yeah, I suppose that doesn't matter too much. So basically, would you get a 6-core or an 8-core CPU? Well, let's start with the first bit. Are 6 cores future-proof? I mean, how, like, obviously 8's more future-proof, but it's like, will that future-proof thing become a consideration within the lifetime of that purchase? Hard to say on that one. I don't really think that should be a consideration. Really, the way I look at it, and I'd like to get your take on this in a second, Tim, is it's obviously a budget thing. So, real quick off the top of my head, Ryzen 5 3600, about $170 US. Ryzen 7 3700X, what's that, like $280 or $300? It's about I think it's about $280, let's say. Yep. So what's about $100 US more. So $100 US more for 2 more cores that you may or may not need. Probably, you certainly don't need right now. There's a couple of games that see a bit of a performance uplift, but you're hardly stuttering and performance choked with the 6-core. So $100 US more on your GPU will definitely get you, whoops, I just hit my keyboard, a significantly better gaming experience, or a noticeably better gaming experience, whereas the 2 cores probably won't.
Yeah, that's
what do you reckon, Tim?
Pretty much exactly what I was going to say. Basically, okay. I mean, if you're going to save $100 on the processor, you can put it to $100 on something else. And even if you don't choose a GPU as the upgrade, you could potentially, more RAM, more storage. Storage is obviously an important factor for people. So, yeah, in general, I think with any sort of purchase, it's all about buying what is good now and what's going to sort you out now, because it's just too hard to predict stuff for the future. And it's always nice to get something that is, not right on the threshold of being obsolete. Like, for example, buying a quad core these days is probably going to be pushing it a little bit if you were thinking of, wanting your PC to last for a few more years. But certainly when you're talking about something that comfortably plays stuff today, is, not utilized to the fullest in a lot of titles still these days, then yeah, you're going to still be good for a couple more years, and then the future-proofing stuff is kind of just irrelevant. Just buy what's good for now and go from there.
Yeah, when you're talking about $100 difference, or possibly like $120 difference on a part in the 6 cores case that costs like $170, that's a significant difference. You're better off putting that money aside, and then in 2 years, buy a Ryzen 4000 or Intel equivalent or whatever, and you've got that $100 all ready to play with. So
could be half the cost of that new CPU, yeah.
Yeah. So you're better off just buying what you need now, and really a good 6-core, 12-thread processor, in my opinion, I think Steve from Gamers Nexus has the same opinion, plays all games fine. I think they quite heavily recommend the Ryzen 5 3600. I've been using that to play a lot of games. Works awesome. No stuttering. And the Intel, the what is it, the 10600K? That's an awesome gaming CPU. Really good value. So yep. I wouldn't be too worried about that.
All right, next question. I have a 6700K that I overclocked to the point of degradation, and I'm starting to feel it now. In your opinion, purely for a 1440p to 4K gaming PC, does Intel really even matter, or has AMD closed the gap with their stack enough to make no discernible difference? To paraphrase everyone on the internet, Intel is best for games, but is it really? It's hard to tell since most reviews are just at 1080p. I think luckily you've done a bit of 1440p testing with some of these CPUs, so you're probably in a pretty good position to talk about this.
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone says, well, just about everyone, us included, says Intel is the best for games, but what does that mean? The best by how much? And that's generally what we go into and discuss in our reviews. So we do include 1440p high to ultra quality testing in our reviews. We've also gone and done some competitive gameplay testing, which is probably quite telling if you're asking this question. Realistically, I mean, again, it depends on what graphics card you're using. I'm sort of under the assumption here that we're not talking about an RTX 2080 Ti. But if you've got something like a 2070 Super, not really going to matter. Not really. I mean, are you going to be able to tell the difference? I'd like to see the game or situation where you can tell the difference, because I certainly haven't come across it. Especially when we're talking about comparing third gen with the Intel stuff. Second gen Ryzen, yeah, there was some pretty big differences here and there, so that's something you want to consider. At the same time, though, I still think for most people the Ryzen option was better value. But these days, it's so close. It really is so close that I just don't think it's worth going with Intel in a lot of situations. But if you're gaming and you really do want every last frame, then, as we've said 1,000 times, they are the fastest. They are the best for gaming, technically.
Should I buy B550 to use PCIe Gen 4 graphics cards in the future and ditch B450? Interesting.
No, you definitely shouldn't do that because, okay, well, without getting into any of that stuff, the reason why you shouldn't do that and you should never do anything like this is because why would you do that? Like, you have the option of buying a B550 at any point in time. So do it when it's evident that you need to, not because you think maybe one, like, it's not like you're sort of phrasing this like, I've got the option to buy a B550 motherboard tomorrow and then never again. And that's not the situation. You can buy a B550 board tomorrow, or you can absolutely buy one a lot easier and cheaper in a month's time, certainly in 6 months' time. So, yeah, the answer's no on that one. Just don't do it till it's self-evident that you should.
Yeah, and I think there's question marks over how long it will take until PCIe Gen 4 is required for GPUs. I think the more critical use case of PCIe 4.0 at the moment is more your storage devices, your really high-performance SSDs. So maybe, if you did want that storage performance improvement, you could get that today by upgrading from B450 to B550, putting in a fast SSD. But are you going to get that with GPUs right now? Probably not. Almost certainly not. So I think that plays into what you were saying, yeah.
Yeah, I think even now the storage thing's very questionable for sustained read-write performance, but that's a whole different thing that we haven't really looked into heavily. All right, another short little simple question here, which we're going to direct towards Tim. And we've sort of answered this one, but I think Tim wants to elaborate a bit more. Why all OEM hate AMD 4000 series? Why, Tim? Why the hate?
So, I mean, we've talked a little bit in the past about all the reasons why companies are putting Ryzen 4000 processors in, lower mid-range parts, lower mid-range laptops. So don't really want to cover all that again. You can see our previous questions to sort of, see the answers to that. But personally, having looked at some of the more recent laptops that have come out onto the market, I wouldn't say that OEMs hate, the AMD 4000 series at all. They're definitely targeting the entry and mid-level products. But some of the reviews that I've seen recently for products like the new HP Omen gaming laptop and the Acer Nitro laptop, it looks like both of those companies have put a lot of effort into making those products quite compelling, from, designing nice quality coolers, putting in good quality screens, and really, optimizing the performance and everything so that the laptops run really nicely. So I think there are definitely OEMs out there that are putting a really solid effort into making their products, really nice and worth buying. Maybe you're not going to get your RTX 2070, RTX 2080 gaming laptops with Ryzen 4000 just yet, but there are definitely some laptops out there that seem like they are worth buying that have Ryzen 4000 processors in, and that's not even including the U-series laptops. And there's lots of what looks to be really compelling budget laptops that will deliver very good Ryzen 4000 performance with them. I think even in Australia you can get like a 4500U for under $1,000 Australian dollars, which is very, very cheap for a laptop. And that's delivering, as we've seen in our 4500U review, potentially better performance than a flagship Ice Lake processor. So some OEMs are doing a good job. So I think you just have to, do your research as always, find the best products out there. And yeah, there's definitely some good options.
And we've got a question here for Tim because it says speculations all over again. So I'll hand it over to Mr. News Corner, the Friday special. Hello, Hardware Unboxed. I'd like to ask your opinion on AMD's claims of 50% efficiency gain over RDNA for RDNA 2.0. Can it actually mean clock for clock 50% lower power consumption? What can it mean, Tim?
Well, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding with the percentages in this question, because a 50% efficiency gain doesn't mean the 50% lower power consumption. It means more like 33% lower power consumption. 50% lower power consumption means you're halving the power. So basically that would mean that you're getting double the efficiency. So we're not going to see a 50% lower power consumption. Again, 33% is more how those percentages would play out. So I mean, if AMD is claiming a 50% efficiency gain, then that's probably what we should be expecting. But like with all marketing claims, it's probably going to be some very specific aspect to the performance that gives them that efficiency gain. So it might not necessarily be just on the GPU. It could be a combination of that and memory. It could be in some specific title that they've managed to get that efficiency. Who knows? But I think we will see a much more efficient design with RDNA 2, but we'll have to wait and see whether this 50% claim or about a 30% power reduction is going to play out. I think this next one is for you, Steve. So how are we going to go on this one? How is memory scaling upwards of 3800 megahertz with Ryzen 3000? Does higher memory clock compensate for lower fabric clock?
Well, we did a third-gen memory scaling video, but we didn't really look beyond 3800 because that's when you break the 1-to-1 ratio. So generally speaking, no, but it would depend. Like if you can get so first of all, getting the Infinity Fabric to 1900 megahertz is no easy task. Like it's very much silicon dependent. So I had some 3700Xs that would do it, and most of them wouldn't. I think I had one that would do it. So anyway, it's not guaranteed. It's an overclocking thing, obviously. But if you can get it to 1900 megahertz, I think 4000 plus memory with low latency, so tuned timings, can deliver better performance. You can take sort of the next step up in performance for Ryzen. But yeah, it's silicon dependent. I think really we typically recommend aiming for like an Infinity Fabric frequency of like 1800 megahertz with DDR4 3600, and that gives you pretty good performance out of the box. And then if you can shoot up the memory timings, those sub timings, tertiary timings, you get quite a big performance leap. So that's something you can play around with if you're interested. But yeah, I just think that's a more realistic, more reasonable sort of thing to aim for. But of course, with overclocking, your mileage may vary, as they say. So I wouldn't go saying that, it's fairly typical to get 4000 plus and see better performance, because there's quite a bit of effort that has to go into achieving that. So that's why we typically stick with the easier to achieve overclocks that the majority should be able to achieve. All right, I think this one's for you, Tim, because I see HDRs in there, so that seems like a Tim tag. What does the HDR setting in Windows actually do? When I turn on HDR in a game, it simply puts on HDR signal to my monitor, even when the Windows setting is turned off.
So my understanding of how this works is that there's kind of two different ways that you can enable HDR. Some applications require you to turn on the HDR setting in Windows, so they don't have a toggle in the application itself, but they rely on the Windows toggle. So depending on whether you've turned it on or off, it will enable an HDR mode or not. And there has been some games where that's the case. I think in the past, games like Shadow of Mordor, whatever that game was called, that game required you to turn on the HDR setting on in Windows to have the game also run in the HDR mode. But most games these days seem to have their own dedicated toggle, which kind of just overrides the Windows setting. I think that also is quite a good thing to have, because a lot of the time you might want to play your game in HDR, but then not run your desktop in HDR because the desktop HDR setting is kind of broken most of the time. So I think it's actually quite a good way for it to work. Obviously, a lot of productivity apps require the HDR setting on. So yeah, there just appears to be different ways that applications can send an HDR signal. So that's why you see that difference.
We've got another question here, Tim. Pretty sure this one is addressed to you as well, because it requires your crystal ball. So, do you think next-gen graphics cards will bring better price to performance ratios into the sub $200 US segment? This user has an RX 570. It cost him $125 US 2 years ago. Now a 1650 Super and 5500 XC, probably the 8GB model, are only 25% faster at best while costing 30 to 35% more.
Yeah, so I think what this person is saying here is really what has happened with this entire recent generation of GPUs. There's been just a stagnation for the most part in terms of price and performance. There's been, NVIDIA putting higher price cards that perform better at the top end. There's been a bit of movement in the mid-range with like the 5700 series, but at the same time, without stuff pushing down the rest of the pricing, what you get is what you're seeing here with your sort of 25% faster cards for 30 to 35% more in that lower tier bracket. What it's sounding like is these upcoming generations will be a pretty significant refresh from an architectural standpoint from both companies. So I would think that when we're getting more competition from both companies, a big refresh from architecture, that will slowly push down the pricing. We might not immediately get a really compelling sub $200 part, but over time, those prices getting pushed down will help. I think something as well that impacted the pricing for these particular products this generation was, say, your GDDR6 pricing when that technology first hit the market. It was, those low-end cards opting for GDDR6. It was often a significant amount of the price of the card was just on the memory. That's not going to be as much of an issue with upcoming cards, I wouldn't have thought. So I think that will help out those products as well.
Yeah, I think there's a few factors. I think they were on the tail end of cryptocurrency mining as well, and they were still trying to cash in on that. So, that shouldn't be a problem for the next generation. So I think we will see, more competition there, better pricing. But
hope so.
Fingers crossed we do, of course. All right, that is going to do it for all of the Community tab questions for this month. Again, a lot of great questions. We have the Patreon questions coming up. And I quite enjoyed this one. What about you, Tim? How did it go for you? How did it go for remote Tim?
Yeah, pretty well over here. I think it's just been raining a little bit throughout this Q&A here, so hopefully it hasn't been too annoying for you guys. But fun times. Fun times. Always enjoy doing the Q&A, despite Steve trying to suggest that I don't enjoy doing the Q&A. So, no, I think it's good. So, had a lot of fun.
Everyone knows you love it. Everyone knows you love it, Tim. I'm just joking, of course.
I got to say, it is a bit better in person, though. I'm looking forward to when we be able to get rid of the monitor, Steve, and have you actually here in person for doing the Q&As. I think that'll be good.
Well, we've got some other content we want to do as well.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's not looking like we'll be able to do it anytime soon, unfortunately. So
sad times. Oh, well, we'll just have to put all that stuff on hold, and my Threadripper build will have to wait for another day.
Just sitting on my shelf for now.
I'm looking forward to that. I need that Threadripper power for especially editing these Q&As. You know how much 16 cores does not cut it for editing Q&As, especially with Monitor Steve. You require 32, Anyway, let's end this one. We're out of here. Subscribe, like, do all that stuff. Support us on Patreon so you can ask Patreon questions, which we'll cover in the part 3 coming up in the next one. I think people would have just missed the live stream, so maybe wait until the start of next month to sign up so you're not charged twice on Patreon. And
though it was a very good live stream, a very juicy one, some good details in there, so it's still very relevant, so you can go back and watch that if you sign up now.
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting one, that one. It's probably a good watch even on the replay, so definitely worth checking that one out. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm in person, real life Tim over here. Who are you?
Social distancing monitor Steve.
All right.
And we'll see you again next time.
See ya.